I've brought it up multiple times in past videos, but only because it's so on point. In his novel 1984, George Orwell wrote of a future where, quote, nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull.
It's kind of crazy today that we live quite comfortably in a world that George Orwell would have thought was super crazy.
But we're living in a world right now where billions of dollars are being spent to try and decode our brains, where arguments are being made everywhere from Davos.
You know, the brain is a spatiotemporal device, right? It's a blob of meat that computes.
To Scientific American, that the Bill of Rights doesn't cover what they are now calling cognitive liberty.
Sophisticated neuroimaging machines and brain-to-computer interfaces that can detect the electrical activity of neurons enable us to decode and even alter the nervous system signals that accompany mental processes.
And that protections of our inherent rights need to be put in place before the technology outpaces our ability to do so, which it is. This is something that scientists have actually been calling for since at least the 60s, and it seems like it's if by design that they've just been turning a deaf ear to that for the last, 60 years. In the last video I put up, I discussed how science has come to the basic conclusion in the last half a century that we really are run by signals. Signals on a person-to-person level, signals from our five senses continuously building our reality, and signals all the way down to the cellular level controlling our gene expression. Where science is taking this, with cybernetic systems of communication and control, I just don't think the average person has any idea of where we're about to go as a society with this. Princeton professor Sebastian Sung, who used to be a computational neuroscience professor at MIT, wrote a book back in 2013 claiming that the way the 100 billion neurons and regions in our brains are wired creates and shapes our identity and our personality.
And perhaps other aspects of your personal identity, maybe your personality and your intellect, maybe they're also encoded in the connections between your neurons. And so now you can see why I proposed this hypothesis: I am my connectome.
In other words, he says what he calls our connectome is actually who we are.
All together now. I am my connectome.
And he has a very new agey website, and in the same transhumanist fashion as much of today's cutting-edge science, he says that if we can just conquer our brains, then we can change ourselves for the better, inferring that we can rewire our brains to make ourselves better people. And after quoting Arthur C. Clarke that any sufficient technology is indistinguishable from magic, he goes on to make the claim that information is the new soul. So now our information is our soul. This is information which everything in the scientific world after World War II sought to control in every way possible.
Information is collected, data is gathered, the information is sent out by teletype signals of the target, operations.
So now they're saying that our information is our soul. That's them saying it, by the way. I didn't say that. This is what a computational neuroscientist from MIT, who now is a professor at Princeton and is quoted in the New York Times about how our information is us and all this stuff. This is what they're trying. This is now how science is moving along under models such as this. That is what I'm trying to show you. I'm not even going to go off on the side tangent about how they've been trying to use science and the precursors to science to get to the soul for hundreds of years now. But again, I will just say that all of this cutting-edge neuroscience tech that they're rushing to create, when they reported on it in the MIT Tech Review magazine several years back, they called it hacking your soul. So it makes it very obvious that that's the level that they're aiming for. They're aiming for something much more than just understanding your brain and how your brain works, which they still, in many ways, don't, even today. So I know it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that if your reality is created through signals received externally through your senses, and those signals can in any way be altered, then your reality can be altered. Because if perceptions and signals from perceptions can run reality, then misperceptions can too. All of this new neurotech, a lot of it is coming out of the Brain Initiative that President Obama announced in 2014, which is co-planned by someone from Rockefeller University. Just like MKUltra itself was largely funded and influenced by the Rockefellers back in the day. The word brain in Brain Initiative actually stands for Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies. And I know it sounds like a crappy thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyways, that these advances always begin with a foot in the door on something that almost everyone can get behind, like helping quadriplegics to communicate with brain-computer interfaces. But once that door is open an inch for a good reason, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we know it won't be long before the door gets kicked off the hinges. I mean, companies like Facebook are working on tech to allow users to type with their thoughts, which Facebook claims they're only going to read the thoughts that you've decided you want to share.
We're talking about decoding those words, the ones you've already decided to share, by sending them to the speech center of your brain.
So go ahead and trust them on that, I guess. That's sarcasm. Scientists are implanting false memories into mice now, which is also very Blade Runner.
You think I'm a replicant, don't you? It's me with my mother.
They're talking about creating tech that can turn our sleep on and off.
But when safer techniques are developed for humans, we could potentially turn sleep on and off at will.
In other words, your consciousness, like a light switch. I mean, it all sounds like science fiction to an 80s kid like me, but this is the stuff they're actually doing right now. I mean, DARPA's working on putting EEG readers in every classroom and building devices that can record from 1 million neurons and stimulate a targeted 100,000 neurons based on what it records. They want read and write access to your brain like it's a computer. That is what they're going for with this stuff. Which brings me to this new research that was just published a few weeks ago out of the University of California, San Francisco. Researchers funded by DARPA's SubNets program, which stands for Systems-Based Neurotechnology for Emerging Therapies, claim they've now identified a common pattern of brain activity that's linked to feelings of low mood. They say they've located what they believe is a single signal that almost completely accounts for bouts of depressed mood in a large subset of people. And so they're claiming that if they can target that signal with new technological therapies, they could help those people's brains unlearn the detrimental signaling pattern that creates depression. Is that something that we should be doing? Isn't there a reason why we have these emotions? Why would we think that there's not going to be any negative ramifications for eradicating them? They don't really know a lot about how the brain works, and they're tinkering with it on this level. We'll just go to the signal in your brain that causes depression, and we'll just eradicate that signal. We'll have you unlearn that signal. I don't know about you guys, but when I heard that, my mind immediately went to Philip K. Dick land and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the story that the Blade Runner films are based on. Within the first few pages of this story, the characters, which is Rick Deckard, who is the character that Harrison Ford played in the original Blade Runner, and his wife, are arguing about what to dial on something they have called a Penfield mood organ, which can make them feel any emotion they want to on demand. And they're getting into an argument about it because he's saying she set her dial too weak and he wants to reset it, and she's saying keep your hand off my settings. And they start to have a fight, and he's saying at his console he's hesitating between dialing for a thalamic suppressant, which would abolish his angry mood, or a thalamic stimulant, which would make him feel angry enough to win the argument. And she's saying if you dial for greater venom, I will dial the same, I'll dial the maximum, and you'll see a fight that makes every argument we've had up until now seem like nothing. Dial and try me, right? She says, my schedule for today lists a 6-hour self-accusatory depression. And he's saying, what? Why would you put that? Why would you dial that mood on purpose? It defeats the whole purpose of having a mood organ. And he says, I didn't even know you could set it for that. And she explains all of this about how she was confronted with a very depressing situation, but she just felt empty. She didn't feel anything because her moods are so jacked up. And she said, but it's unhealthy not to feel anything. It used to be considered a sign of mental illness. They called it absence of appropriate effect. To not feel anything when you're confronted with a depressing situation. So twice a month now, she's been putting this self-accusatory depression on her schedule so she can feel what should be an appropriate emotion about a bad situation. And he's saying, why don't you just dial 888, the desire to watch TV no matter what's on it? And she said, I don't want to dial anything now. And he says, well, then dial a 3. And she says, I can't dial a setting that stimulates my cerebral cortex into wanting to dial. If I don't want to dial, I don't want to dial that the most of all, because then I will want to dial, and wanting to dial is the most alien drive I can imagine. I just want to sit here on the bed and stare at the floor. This scene between them ends when he says, I'll dial for both of us, and he dials a 594 for her, which is pleased acknowledgement of husband's superior wisdom in all matters. I mean, in a situation like this, what is reality? What is real anymore? If you don't have authentic emotions, if you aren't appropriately emotionally responding to what's going on in your life and the relationships you have with people, is any of it real at all? I mean, first of all, if you're depressed, most likely there are things going on in your life that's contributing to your depression. And if you can just mess with the signals in your brain to not feel the appropriate mood, that doesn't change what's happening in your environment that contributed to that mood in the first place. So now you're just walking around happy in the worst possible situation, or in a very bad one. In that sense, you could be happy with anything, because you won't have the appropriate emotions that are there to help you react and respond to what's happening in your environment. And if they can do it with that, so are they going to dial love too? I mean, will anything in your life be real if it can all be synthetically dialed using machines that just replicate or inhibit signals in your brain? And that's the whole beginning of this short story about androids dreaming of electric sheep. And in that way, we would become like androids, because they can just mess with the signals in your brain. If you're just messing with signals in your brain, that doesn't have anything to do with authentically living your life and responding to your signals in your actual environment. That just has to do with whatever you want. Just toy with your brain. Just turn your brain on and off like a machine. Philip K. Dick named this the Penfield mood organ, specifically after Dr. Wilder Penfield. He was a Rhodes Scholar who was trained at Oxford under Sir Charles Sherrington and went on to work at McGill University with Rockefeller Foundation funding. He was mentoring MKUltra contractors at that place, and he was working literally a block down the street from other notorious MKUltra researchers who were also Rockefeller funded, like Dr. Ewan Cameron of Subproject 68 out of the Allen Memorial Institute. I mean, this isn't just anybody that he chose to name, that Philip K. Dick chose to name this device after. It's named after somebody who was doing experimental research on people with deep brain electrodes and queuing up their memories and their emotions, and it goes on and on from there. So Wilder Penfield, he takes up a pretty decent chunk of time in our film because it's very important to understand what this man was doing and really how we got to where we are today in society, where they're talking about even creating a technology to train your brain to unlearn certain signals, started with MKUltra. And we talk about all of this extensively in our film. That film has direct bearing on today. That's why I keep bringing it up, because the world that we're stepping into right now comes out of the stuff they were doing at that time. And the new brain initiative might as well be MK Ultra 3.0 at this point. The technology we do have at hand is already making people apathetic as it is. I mean, what happens when somebody gets hurt in public now? A lot of people just pull out their phones and film it. They don't react or respond as empathetic human beings normally do in a situation where they see somebody get hurt. So what's that going to look like down the road when we have technology changing our emotions to fit our whims and not to fit our actual reality? We're living basically in the prequel to Blade Runner. In more ways than just this, actually. This is where they're taking society. A place where you can, I guess, dial back emotions you don't want, or use computers to unlearn emotions that you have for a reason. You have these emotions for a reason. We're not all just crazy, that we're all just walking around and can't control our emotions. I'm not saying there aren't people who are, but the average person who's depressed there's reasons for that. It isn't just like, well, that's a bad emotion, just eradicate it. I don't know, when I saw that, I had to share. I can't even keep on top of how fast these things are happening and how fast this technology is progressing and changing. And I just feel like no one's talking, everyone's applauding every new technology they come up with. They're just clapping and...
All together now. I am my connectome.
And laughing, and it's just so great. And where are the ethical considerations of this? Where are the practical considerations of it? This stuff is happening faster than the ethics can keep up with. I guess since they're pushing us all into this transhumanist future where they expect us to evolve anyway, they don't really care what happens to your humanity. But we should.